Stead, we're live.
All right, we're going to ask again, what the hell is the Rhode Island Department of Education trying to do to our kids? Are our Rhode Island students up for sale? And proof that critical race theory is indeed in our Rhode Island classrooms. Welcome to In the Dugout. Still haven't missed. Mike Stenhouse here, your host. Thanks to Larry the Liberty Guy for that great introduction. You know, yesterday we had a in-depth interview with Ramona Bessinger, and we looked at some of the shocking, if not perverted, curriculum that RIDE is trying to push forward when it comes to health education, sexual education. It's pleasure-based education. It's very subjective, very divisive, very controversial. It's not biological, sex-based, objective education. That was yesterday. Today, as you may have seen, our center put forth a report, and we'll go into some detail on that shortly, criticizing, analyzing, and unfortunately criticizing just some what you won't believe, unbelievable social studies standards on how they want to teach U.S. history to K through 12 students in Rhode Island. I've got some comment I'm going to prove to you. I'm going to follow. We're going to go very quick. We'll go into this in more detail in future shows, but I'm going to give you a timeline. I'm going to give you the proof. The federal government, the state government are pushing this stuff into our schools, how it all happened, how it came to pass, a timeline, and follow the money. We're going to have David Randall, the author of our report, which is called Taken for a Ride, capital R-I-D-E, all capitals, Rhode Island Department of Education. And then we'll close. He'll be with us in about 15 minutes. And then we'll close our show, a final segment with our beloved Boomer Zoomers down there at the Charleston Senior Center. And we're actually going to have, I think we're going to have a pretty good debate on school choice. We don't all see eye to eye on that. All right, let's take a step back here. Critical race theory is an academic discipline, right? That basically says that the United States is a nation founded on white supremacy, that these forces, those evil forces, as they call it, are still at the root of our society, and that even though we claim liberty in our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution, that they're just camouflages for racial domination by evil white founders and, by extension, all of us as descendants. They believe that racism is a constant universal condition, and that it really hasn't changed. It's just become a little more subtle and nuanced over history. At its core, critical race theory is a reformulation of the Marxist theory of critical theory. And in this case, it just tries to pit the oppressed as the blacks against the oppressors as the whites. But the basic conclusion is the same, that in order to liberate men and really achieve freedom, we've got to have some kind of moral, economic, political, and in this case, educational revolution. We must change the culture, as you'll see. I'll explain in just a minute. But since the critical race theory agenda has become exposed, and again, thanks to the silver lining of the COVID lockdowns, parents seeing what their kids are learning, because all this was intended to be hidden from the public, hidden from parents, progressives are reacting with outrage and maybe even some panic that the gig is up, that the cat is out of the bag, that their critical race theory movement is now out there in the open for everybody to see and to criticize and hopefully in many cases to defeat. But they still push forward lies. In fact, one of the first lies they put forward is this. And you heard it right off the bat. Tara Granahan, you might remember her. The hope she fell for it. The host on WPRO when the union official says, "Oh, CRT is not in our schools. It's definitely not being taught on our schools." It's a lie. It's a lie. And this report that we put forward today, Taken for a Ride, how Rhode Island Social Studies Standards shortchange students, is the basis for how we're going to refute some of those lies and prove to you that the Rhode Island Department of Education is looking to indoctrinate kids with anti-American, with anti-white, anti-Christian, and all kinds of other orthodoxy that I can only describe as critical race theory. Like I said, in a few minutes, about 10 minutes, we're going to be joined by the author of that report, David Randall. We co-produced that report or co-released it with a very credible national organization called the Civics Alliance. But back to CRT, the central tenets of CRT are anti-racist. They're trying to claim that if we put kids through anti-racist policies or teachings, if we do bias training with teachers and students, and we do this social and emotional learning so we can all better understand each other, and we make sure kids know what oppression looks like and how America has oppressed certain groups of people over time, that this kind of a culturally relevant, pedagogy, if you would call it, is what students need to learn. And as we will show, these tenets are laden all the way. I mean, they are the core of the social studies standards put forth by the Rhode Island Department of Education last December, and it is the subject of this report. And as we will continually ask here, are Rhode Island students and their academic achievement and their knowledge, their patriotism, their citizenship even, is all that up for sale by the Rhode Island Department of Education? Are they compromising our kids' futures just so they can bring in some big federal money? Well, you want to know how much federal money is at stake? Take a look at this. So there are 12 states, at least, that we know of, and Rhode Island is one of them, with $415 million from the federal government as part of the COVID relief plan, the ARP plan, the ESSER funds, or educational funds dedicated to education. If Rhode Island were to put forth a plan that would comply with the federal Department of Education's, social equity, social justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion kind of philosophy and teachings. So I'm going to take you through right now, the question we got, well, how did we get here? How is it that the Rhode Island Department of Education could get to the point where they would put forth such anti-American, such divisive, such inaccurate, and historically, it's not even close to the truth. How can they put forth such unacademic standards? How do we get here? So I'm going to give you a little timeline of events. We're going to write this up eventually, but I want you to follow this closely in your mind, all right? In 2019, this is the key in Rhode Island. In 2019, Rhode Island General Assembly passed legislation that enabled RIDE and empowered RIDE to say, you must develop academic standards in these certain disciplines, social studies of which is one, and then you push those down, give them a few little choices here and there, and trust me, the choices aren't much. But you can basically develop one-size-fits-all curriculum standards, and then we can force each of our 39 school districts in this state to adopt it. We are giving you that power, Rhode Island Department of Education. Now, you saw yesterday what they did when it came to health or sexual health, with their perverted and way over the top and way age inappropriate sex education plan. Today, we're talking about their social studies standards. All right, so in 2019, the General Assembly gives that power to the Rhode Island Department of Education and takes it away from local school districts and parents and all the other community people that would be involved in making local decisions in each school district. A one-size-fits-all, top-down from Rhode Island Department of Education. In 2021, the American Federation of Teachers and the National Education Association launch a massive influence and lobbying campaign to get these billions of dollars of ARP funds and these ESSER funds, these educational funds, out to schools, because they know that in those that in the plans, which we'll talk about in a second, there is kind of like a string. You know, with federal funds, we talk about strings being attached or federal mandates with that money. Well, that mandate is you must advance the Biden administration's, their Department of Education social equity agenda. I'm paraphrasing and I'm making it simple, but it's all provable. It's all true. Indeed, in 2021, the Biden administration does pass trillions of dollars in COVID relief funds, including billions of dollars to schools to adopt equity. There's that term again, equity standards. ARP, the big national omnibus COVID relief, allocated over $120 billion for elementary and secondary school emergency relief. Much of that money, we don't know exactly how much, but much of that money is used to advance that equity agenda, whether it's across mathematics or social studies or English or whatever the case may be. And the U.S. Department of Education then required each state with all this money, right, sitting in this big tranche up there in Washington, D.C., the U.S. Department of Education, also in 2021, required each state, if you want some of this money, you have to submit a plan outlining how you're going to intend to spend the federal funding in compliance with our, quote, equity agenda. That's part of the requirements. It's not everything. And then later that year, or also in 2021, the Department of Education, the federal level, the U.S. Department of Education, issues actual guidelines for K through 12 schools to undertake a culture shift by implemented, never before seen, equitable practices. All right. This is part of the federal, I don't know if I call it a mandate, but basically, hey, if you want the money, here's what you got to do. You got to create a cultural shift by implementing these new equitable practices throughout all your curriculum. So in 2021, the Rhode Island Department of Education, I believe in conjunction with Governor McKee, they put together something called a LEAP task force, local education authority panel or something like that. They called it a LEAP, L-E-A-P, a LEAP task force to make recommendations on the best uses for those federal funds in order to comply with those federal guidelines I just told you about. And indeed, later that year, RIDE does submit a state plan for the American Rescue Plan Act. And here it is. Oh, let me show it to you right here. Here is that plan. It's a 51-page document, and it pretty much follows right to the T exactly what I just read to you, all those standards I just read to you. In fact, here it is. You can see partners in the LEAP task. Here it defines the LEAP task force that helped the state Department of Education decide how they were going to spend this federal money and comply with federal strings. So they submit the plan, and Rhode Island's plan uses terms, CRT terms, right? Critical race theory tenets such as cultural responsiveness, quote, anti-racism, quote, equity. All of these are critical race theory terms. All of these are buried not only within the state's plan to get the money, but now they're social studies standards that this report and our author will talk to you about in just a minute. Indeed, sometime in late 2021 or 2022, RIDE does receive hundreds of millions in federal aid. Let me show you that picture again. Rhode Island, one of 12 states that complied fully with the federal strings. Rhode Island received $415 million in ESSER funds. That's just a portion of the ARP that is to go towards educational institutions. Okay, you with me so far? All right, we're almost done here. And we're almost going to get to our author and talk about our report. Then, so early in 2022, these funds are promised or received. We're not exactly sure of the flow of the money. We'll see if we can look into that at some point in the future. Then just 2 months ago, in December, RIDE indeed puts forth its proposed social studies standards. And if you compare the federal guidelines to get the funds, if you compare the state's application to ask for the funds, and if you compare the state social studies standards, it's all the same stuff, right? It's all the same culturally responsive, culturally, the culture change of anti-racism, cultural responsiveness, and equity. You see the oppressed versus the oppressor everywhere throughout the document. And that brings us to now February 2nd, 2023, when our Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity issues a report critiquing and exposing these RIDE social studies standard. All right, one more thing before I bring on our guest. Here is who voted or who didn't vote for the 2019 legislation that I hope people understand was a major mistake. In the Rhode Island House of Representatives, you can see it passed 63 to 2. All right, we only had 2 noes. We had four abstentions, and no, we had 69 yays, 2 noes. 5 Republican, only 2 people in the entire General Assembly voted against the enabling legislation. Representative David Place from up there in Burrillville and Representative Sherry Roberts down there in Coventry and East West Warwick or somewhere down there. In the Senate, it was unanimous. All 38 members of the Senate voted yes. The reason I show you this, I think our number one goal in releasing this report is to give local school committees the option to say no to this report, no to these bogus social studies, these divisive social studies standards, inaccurate, historically incorrect, and to adopt something like American Birthright, which we'll talk about shortly instead. We need to repeal this 2019 law, but it's going to be tough. The General Assembly is locked into this woke agenda. And many people, even in leadership, even in the Republican Party, voted yes for this bill 4 years ago. And you know how difficult it is for any lawmaker, any elected official to admit that they might have been wrong and to reverse course. They just don't do it. Even Republicans probably who know they made a mistake voting for that bill 4 years ago, it will be tough to convince them to switch gears. And I know because I've talked to a few of them in recent days. It's just not the way they operate, right? Doing the right thing is not the way they operate. Covering your ass is what they do. That's what they do best, and you know that. So we ask you to inquire at your local school committees, and may not even be the decision of your school committees. It may be the decisions of the curriculum directors and the superintendent's office, but you got to dig at your local level and see if they're willing to consider some other standard than these bogus standards that RIDE is trying to force upon school districts in our state. More on that. We're going to be covering this for weeks and months. But right now, I want to bring in our guest, David Randall, the author of the report Taken for a Ride. David Randall, it's been a while since you've been here, but welcome back to In the Dugout.
Thank you so much for having me on.
All right. I see you playing ball with us today. What cap you got on today?
Brooklyn Cyclones.
Oh, is that a minor league team?
Minor league. I live in Brooklyn, New York. It's great fun. You get to go to Coney Island, have a hot dog, and see a ball game. It's great.
No, it's independent league. It's professional.
Minor. Gosh, I think they're for the Mets. They're a farm team for the Mets.
All right. Well, thank you. Look, thanks for playing ball with us, and thanks for the terrific report you wrote. You are a real academic, boy. I mean, the citations you have in that report, the excerpts you pull from the RIDE standards. You can't. I mean, it's a 54-page report. You can't ask for more detail than what you put forward. How does a guy like you have the patience to do something like that?
It's a labor of love. not only love American history and civics for the purpose of teaching our children how to be good citizens of the United States, I just love history for its own sake. And it's upsetting when it's being taught so badly, when it's not just that it's politicized, but that there are actual historical errors, major errors, littering the report. So because I love history for its own sake, as well as for being a necessary part of a good American education, that's why it was so important for me to write it.
So if you were to summarize, you don't have to respond to anything you're seeing on the screen. I'm just kind of doing it for background so people can multitask, hear from you and read what they'd like. But if you were to summarize and put into perspective, based on what you've seen in other states, based on what you've studied in great detail and reported on in Rhode Island, how would you rank Rhode Island when it comes to social studies standards compared to the rest of the country?
Nearly the worst. Minnesota is the worst that I've seen yet because it's even more politicized than Rhode Island's, and they've got far less content. A good deal of the content is politicized in Rhode Island, but at least they have content. And some of it is even decent, and not trying to be unfair to them. Third grade geography is actually pretty good for getting the geography of the American regions. It mentions Rhode Islanders like Nathaniel Greene. That's a great thing for Rhode Islanders to know about.
So it's got a little accurate Rhode Island history in it, but the U.S.
Yeah.
history probably pretty lacking, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, sorry, I was trying to be gentle there and nice, but really, an awful lot is just terribly done. So it's terribly politicized, what they do have of it, and because they use such a secretive bureaucratic process, they just made endless errors. Errors of language, incoherent sentences, misnumbered standards, and then just stuff that's factually wrong. They asked students to study about the Persian Empire at a time when there was no Persian Empire to study. And it's not just that it's bad for the students and the teachers. This is supposed to be used for textbook developers, for professional development developers, for making curriculum. That's all now in Rhode Island statute law. You cannot follow the law and teach accurate history. You have to break the law to actually provide a textbook where the Persian Empire is in the right time and place.
Get more into that. So basically, you're saying not only does this disserve students, but it's disturbing teachers and potentially book publishers as well. There's one line that you put in there that I want to share that is my favorite line in the whole report. And by the way, you can go to Ocean State Current and read our media release and then get a link to the report. But you say these standards, what you call the standards, these social, is neither by the people of Rhode Island nor of the people of Rhode Island, but it nevertheless will be imposed on the people of Rhode Island. That's a powerful line. And pretty much that goes to point to the fact that this LEAP task force that put forth how the state of Rhode Island would comply with federal equity standards in order to get the money itself was a one-sided, corrupt process, right? So you even, as we show right here in the report, you even basically say that they had unaccountable and politicized procedures, right? So before they even put out anything, they started off on the wrong foot.
Yes. And I want to say, we're not talking about some imaginary utopia. We're talking about what you can do in Virginia or South Dakota or no end of states around the nation. And that's have an open process of public comment where anybody can talk, where you have meetings around the state where you can go and meet the the education department personnel, where you've got a website which is up for months allowing you to make comments, and where the education department is supposed to consult equally with every citizen not give a previous commitment that, secretive community groups, all of whom are member of the Radical Identical Politics coalition, get to be the ones who pre-draft the standards. So this is not a weird dream. This is the standard in America. Rhode Island is so far below what most Americans can expect as their right to have an input in the social studies education being taught their children.
So this is from the actual application to the federal government of the money by the Rhode Island Department of Education. This is describing that LEAP task force you were just talking about, its membership, that it's comprised of all left-wing groups, even charter school. We know charter schools really aren't, they're just public school bureaucrats as well. Union appointed representatives. As I mentioned, we know unions are pushing this critical race theory and other divisive stuff. And some of these groups, Generation Citizen, the Providence After School, the College Crusade of Rhode Island, these are all known left-wing Rhode Island kids, kind of left-wing organizations. That's who advise them, and that's why we have such socially equitable portions of the standards. Is there any disagreement with that?
I would add to that, Generation Citizen is one of the most radical national organizations pushing action civics to progress the vocational training for progressive activism. They are a force destroying good civics education everywhere they focus on. It is very unfortunate for Rhode Island that one of their centers is Rhode Island.
Filling this thing off was last year, 2 years ago. We tried to push back against, say, look, this is just a Trojan horse to bring in liberal activism, teach kids to be activists, and we saw in the RIDE standards for social studies, we saw basically action civics come alive in that very document, right?
Yes, it's intense. K through 8. They don't have it so much in high school, but it's throughout K through 8. It's really intensive in 6th grade, as is a great deal of radical identity politics. And it's all building towards this action civics project in 8th grade, where it's not just you should go out and be an activist for the Radical Identity Politics Coalition, but that all of history is being distorted. So here is another example of a social justice activist, as they define it throughout history. So you're turning history into just a list of names of people who were the predecessors of these social justice activists.
So we're not going to go through the report per se, but I do encourage everybody, as I show it a little bit more. I want to take a different tack with you in a second here, David. But you talk about how it's confusing and repetitive. It's not clear. The prose style, the vague jargon, the filled with mistakes, the rhetoric, all that, the misguided approach. We talked about the radical activism and the ignorance of real American historical events. All that. People can read about all that. Your citations are amazing. You pull so many actual excerpts from the report to prove what they're saying, and then you cite other third-party resources. What I'd like to do, David, with you is go to the 2019 law. And I'd like to see, and I want you to compare what I ask you, and let me know if you think the report, and maybe the answer is yes, maybe the answer is no, if the report is living up, I should say, to the spirit of the law. So here's the actual legislation that was passed in 2019. It was Senate Bill 0863, substitute version B. Now it says to institute a process to develop statewide standards, among other things, social studies. This was a hell of a lot more than the process, wasn't it?
They're using the standard language which is used to facilitate and justify radicalization. That is, you have highlighted, include but need not be limited to a culturally and racially diverse group of classroom teachers and students. This is
Exclusively consider a racially diverse group? Does it say that?
so it says that, but what that means
No,
is
no,
that
it says not to be limited to, but but the report
well,
does
well,
limit to that, right?
yeah. The phrase need not be limited to it's the art of politics. You know how politicians are really good at using language, and this is the state of art political language, which of course is going to get you the Identity Politics Coalition. It's just standard operating practice.
All right, let's keep moving on here and look at some more. So it also says it should clearly set forth skills and competencies and knowledge. Now, regardless of the content, you say the expectations that there really are no standards in here. It's just a bunch of what, but there's no skills and competencies that are defined, are there?
Okay, so skills, unfortunately, is something that you're forced to teach students skills instead of real content. You need content knowledge first and foremost. Anytime you include skills, that's just going to be an excuse to waste students' time for some large part of the course. They actually have a competency. The competency is learning everything you need to become a dedicated radical activist. It's quite good at that. It will give you all the history knowledge you need to think I am a radical activist who hates my country and thinks it needs revolutionary change. Students will be wonderfully equipped for that. That's not real social studies, and it's not what you'd expect from a public school system, but that's what they're going to be equipped for.
All right, let's move on. Be constructed, these standards, with regard to established research and recommendations of national organizations to the best of similar efforts in other states. You just said this was among the worst in states. This is not consistent with what's going on nationally, is it?
Oh, the national standards are worsening things. Rhode Island has been exceeding expectations, but it's exceeding the expectations of very misguided national standards. The radical activists have captured not only the Common Core, which does English and mathematics standards, but this is crucial, the C3 social studies standards. If you do your social studies standards by C3, it is framework, it is almost impossible to do a good social studies standard. You have to free yourself from the C3 standards, whether they're done by statute or whether they're done by administrative regulation, if you're going to have proper social studies standards.
All right, let's go back to the law, see if they're following it. Be designed to avoid perpetuating gender, cultural, ethnic, or racial stereotypes. Did they follow that tenet of the law?
I would say no, because what they did was to vilify Americans, vilify, among other groups, whites, men, Christians, and their way of fulfilling that is this deeply disturbing robotic repetition of inserted everywhere. And here, look for the participation of women and minorities, and sometimes children, where if there were any intellectual justification for it, you would not see it repeated as this endless monotone, automatically copied and pasted in everywhere. When you see it done dozens and dozens of times, and I put a fair number of those into the appendix, you can tell this is not openness, this is not inclusion, this is ideology ramming itself down on you and forcing you to think the same way about every topic in history, and to use the same language, the same words about every topic in history.
All right, next item here. And this is something you and I have talked about a lot. You basically say, all right, it probably took somebody with your academic, intellectual, and love of history background to decipher it. But if a member of the public were try to read those standards, they wouldn't have any idea what the hell was going on, would they?
No. I want to say, by the way, Rhode Island put up the standards and then took down the standards very quickly. We got a copy of it downloaded. You have to follow the footnote in our report to where we have their draft standard up on the National Association of Scholars website. So we have what they wrote. You cannot at this moment find it on the Rhode Island Department of Education website.
Education officials trying to hide their agenda from the public.
Yes. And I must say, I'm sure now that we've pointed out all the small mistakes and errors we made, I'm sure they'll try to disguise it as quickly as possible and revise it, but we have the original. But what I wanted to say is, when you go to our website and see this 450-page monster, you can see at a glance, you just look at the number of pages to know no one can read this. A good social studies standard, South Dakota's draft social studies standard gets by, is it 60 pages or 70 pages? Unbelievably shorter. This has all the repetitive questions that duplicate the answers. It has these vast boxes filled with empty space. It has cross-referenced acronyms to tell you which of their grotesquely politicized anchor standards each item is interpreting, articulating, and it is a headache to try to figure out what precisely the social studies standards are actually requiring of teachers. You need to be an obsessive history PhD to actually keep yourself awake long enough to read the thing.
That's why I said,
then you need coffee.
You have the patience and diligence to get through all that. All right. I get it. That's why we put together a report. Our report is still 50-something pages, but at least it's in plain English. At least it points out so people can give the proper context when they read something. Let's look at this one here. It says that the law says the process should be include but not limited community groups, cultural organizations to prepare leading college in both subject. Well, I don't know. Yeah, that's just something. That's nothing I want to bring. So I think. Oh, here we go. So the commissioner, there's supposed to be choices.
Yeah.
They're not supposed to have one size fits all push down. Even we know with other standards there are shades of the same thing, 4 or 5 choices and other. But in social studies, there appears to be one choice only. Did you, in looking through those 450 pages, did you see multiple options for school districts to decide from?
Well, so these are the standards, which there's only one of. There might be multiple curricula.
Okay,
although
gotcha.
If they have to follow the standards, they're all going to be terrible, willy-nilly.
Got it. All right. So the standards are the source of the curricula. So the actual curricula options probably have not yet been prepared, right?
To my knowledge.
Okay, yeah, because it says here the commissioner have to give 5 examples, 5 options, if you would. All right, so I just wanted to spend a few minutes doing that, going through the bill, and just to show you that I have quoted. In fact, let me read my quote to you if I can from our media release, if I can find it. Yeah, these incompetent, misguided social studies standards are further evidence that RIDE has proven itself wholly irresponsible and unworthy of the authority granted to it by the General Assembly in 2019. You've read the law. We just went through some aspects of it again. You've read the report. You read their stand. You wrote your own report. Do you believe that the Rhode Island Department of Education followed the spirit of the 2019 law?
Absolutely not. And I should say, no Rhode Island legislator should feel bound by that vote. When you give a delegation of authority to an administrator, you expect them to behave with minimum professional competence. The Rhode Island Department of Education, in addition to this completely unauthorized politicization of the standards, has not delivered a minimally acceptable product. It cannot spell words properly. It cannot make coherent sentences consistently. It cannot get the basics of history and geography straight in its own social studies standards. No 12th grader should be able to graduate from Rhode Island schools as badly prepared as Rhode Island bureaucrats who are in charge of education appear to be. No Rhode Island legislator should feel bound by incompetents who have failed in the minimum expectation and will get them fired from any private sector job. The very least that they should expect is that Rhode Island's legislators will vote against continuing grant them this authority, and that Rhode Island's legislators will give Rhode Island's school districts and citizens the freedom to leave the authority of bureaucrats who cannot get history straight or English language correct.
You know, in my 2.5 years, that could be the best mini soliloquy I've ever had on this show.
Thank you.
And we're gonna clip that out, and we're gonna put that out there as its own little 90-second or whatever it was 2-minute thing. So I guess you wouldn't think that my statement about the Rhode Island Department of Education being wholly irresponsible and unworthy of the authority granted to it by the General Assembly in 2019, I guess you wouldn't consider that an overstatement then?
No, not at all.
David, we just have 1 or 2 minutes left. Thank you. Where would you like to end? Would you just like to talk about something, make a statement? You want me to point out some section of the report? What haven't we talked about that you'd like to spend the final few minutes on?
American birthright.
Let's talk about the alternative to these standards. That's great.
Okay, so we have our alternate model standards, which we want to inform social studies standards in each state, in each school district, anybody who can, not to be locked down to our standards the way Rhode Island's bureaucrats are trying to do, but to have a model that can be adapted for each state and school district based upon teaching American children the ideals and the institutions of liberty that have founded America and that are the animating spirit of America. And we present it in very clear bullet points. We have it so that it's appropriate for a broad majority of students and states. It's bipartisan. It was originally drawn from the 2003 Massachusetts social studies standards, which is not a deep red state.
Country.
I'm sorry, can you say that? I missed that last sentence.
Educational systems in the country, by the way, which is good. I mean, they had good standards, and we're getting good results. We're with you on that.
So the point is, we have a vision of very clear, fact content heavy standards that give teachers freedom to teach as they will, that parents can use to hold their school districts and their teachers accountable, simply because they can read and understand what it is easily, these social studies standards. So we have a positive alternate model. We're not just making a criticism. We have what we think are wonderful standards for Rhode Islanders and for Americans of every state to build upon.
We'll be pushing more on that, and we'll have you back to talk more about American birthright. But I do have to ask you, just to be journalistically professional here, the one critique that you've heard it, I've heard it. Well, American birthright probably is ignoring, slavery and racism and Jim Crow and all that, and the struggles of whoever the oppressed are the many identity politics groups that the left believes are still being oppressed. A two-part question. A, do your standards ignore that? They say, well, you don't want to teach Black history, A. And B, isn't it true that your standards, it's the pursuit, just like we say in the Declaration, the pursuit of happiness. It's the pursuit of freedom, the pursuit of liberty that is America's great cause, that makes us the shining. Yes, we've been imperfect in achieving that liberty and that freedom equally at all times. But that ideal, that pursuit of equality and freedom under the law is noble, and that your birthright would teach that, where these social studies standards by Rhode Island completely fail to address that at all. Final word to you.
We certainly have, as our primary source recommended documents, we have the 18th century abolitionist John Woolman, the first, sustained argument for abolition. We have Frederick Douglass. We have Martin Luther King. We have the artwork of Jacob Lawrence. We have, many documents recommended on the Trail of Tears. I think there is all the coverage of every sad, unhappy part of United States history, that ought to be in a curriculum. We don't have it as the only thing. Right. We think that if you're talking about post-World War II history, it's important to learn about the personal computer revolution and read documents about what Apple was intending to do in 1978 as they started to invent these computers, for which, for heaven's sakes, we're having our interview on now. We think, we think that when you're doing 19th century history, you ought to have some coverage of Horatio Alger, the tale of working towards prosperity, from rags to riches, and how this genuinely inspired huge numbers of Americans to try to work to rise from rags to riches. And we want to have the common culture of America, what makes us joyful and united as a nation, and that's Hollywood. That's Judy Garland singing and dancing. That's, the novels of Herman Melville and Willa Cather. That's everything that we Americans together have loved to do, to share, to just stop and sing and dance. I mean, this is our history. We are people who sing.
It's our birthright. That's right. Yeah. It's our birthright. Yep.
And George M. Cohan is a Rhode Islander, one of the great composers of the great American.
I didn't even know that. How about that?
Yeah. He's a Rhode Islander. And Rhode Island students ought to know that.
David Randall, you are a joy. You will be back as much. We will have you back as often as you can. Your perspective on all this is so refreshing, and it's so counter to what Rhode Island Department of Education. David Randall, thank you so much for joining us. We'll have you back soon on In the Dugout.
Thank you so much.
All right. Wow. That is wisdom, folks. We talked about this before. You can be smart, you can be educated, but unless you know how to apply that wisdom how to apply that knowledge and education and make it practical and make it understandable and make it real, then you're not very wise. David Randall is educated and wise. And what he just talked about were some of the greatest words, like we said, we've ever had on the show. So I'm going to take it down a level, and I'm just going to wrap up our segment. Just like the law said, I'm reading from the 2019 law, include but not be limited to a culturally and racially diverse group. Well, the Rhode Island social studies standards put forth by Angelica Infante Green and her team were limited, 100% limited almost, to a culturally and racially diverse perspective. And that's what David Randall was just saying. There's a lot more to American history than just that. All right, folks, it's time for our final segment. Now, there's a good segue here. A lot of parents don't want this stuff taught to their kids. It's one of the reasons a lot of parents want to homeschool or move their kids or move to a different school district or get their kids involved in a CTE program or spend money and go to a private school. It's just another reason why we need, in my view, more school choice, more public funds following money to a school of their family's choice. So we're going to debate that topic, and we're not going to be in agreement. This was pre-taped a little bit earlier today, but it's one of our favorite segments every other week. We go down to the Charlestown Senior Center with our beloved Boomer Zoomers. Larry, let's see that interview.